My name is Elsa, and at 67 I never expected to be called a monster by my own flesh and blood. For decades, my daughter Amanda painted me as the villain who abandoned her father without cause. The entire family believed her version, leaving me isolated with a reputation I never deserved. Then last spring, while helping Amanda clean out her inherited house, I found an old letter hidden behind a bathroom mirror. Those yellowed pages changed everything. If you have ever been wrongfully blamed for something you did not do, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Portland, Oregon, 1978. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Our custom home sat on a tree-lined street in one of the most desirable neighborhoods. My husband Thomas had designed and partially built it himself, showcasing his talent as an up-and-coming architect. The two-story colonial, with its white picket fence and manicured lawn, represented everything I thought I had wanted in life. I met Thomas during my sophomore year at University of Oregon. He was a senior architecture student with a magnetic personality and ambitious dreams. Everyone wanted to be around him, yet somehow he chose me. I was studying elementary education, quiet and bookish, compared to his outgoing nature. Our romance moved quickly, perhaps too quickly, looking back. Within 6 months, we were engaged, and we married the weekend after my graduation. Thomas often told the story of how he swept me off my feet, saying I was the beauty to his brains, though in truth I had graduated with honors while he had struggled through some of his technical courses. But Thomas had a way of crafting narratives that cast him in the most favorable light, a skill I would come to recognize too late. Our daughter Amanda arrived 2 years into our marriage. She was beautiful from the moment she was born, with Thomas's striking blue eyes and my auburn hair. As she grew, it became clear she had inherited his charisma as well. By age 8, she was excelling in school, playing violin and collecting friends with effortless ease. Thomas doted on her endlessly, and she was unquestionably a daddy's girl from her earliest days. The community knew Thomas as the dedicated father who coached Little League, despite his busy career, the church elder who always had time to help neighbors with home improvement projects, the rising star in his architectural firm who still made it to every one of Amanda's recitals. People would often tell me how lucky I was to have such an involved husband and father for my child. What they did not see were the subtle ways my world was shrinking. It started with small comments about my friends. Nancy was too gossipy. Susan was a bad influence with her feminist ideas. My college roommate Diane, who came to visit, was clearly jealous of our life and trying to drive a wedge between us. One by one, my social connections dwindled until my world consisted primarily of Thomas and Amanda and the carefully selected couples Thomas approved for dinner parties. Our family routines seemed idyllic on the surface. Sunday brunches after church where Thomas would showcase his pancake flipping skills for an adoring Amanda. Summer camping trips to the Oregon coast where he would teach her to identify constellations while I prepared snacks and kept the campfire going. Christmas mornings where he would record Amanda opening the extravagant gifts he selected, making sure to capture her squeals of delight and the obligatory hug for the camera. During these years, I began experiencing what I can now identify as anxiety and depression, though at the time I had no language for it. Unexplained heart palpitations before Thomas came home from work. Sleepless nights spent going over conversations, wondering where I had gone wrong when he gave me the cold shoulder. Crying in the bathroom with the shower running so Amanda would not hear. I remember one specific afternoon that caused me to question my own reality. Our neighbor Carol stopped by unexpectedly while Thomas was at work. We were having coffee in the kitchen when she mentioned how different Thomas seemed when I was not around. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Carol hesitated. "Just that he seems more relaxed at the neighborhood meetings. You know how he gets when you correct him about details." I did not recall ever correcting Thomas in public. In fact, I had learned early in our marriage to defer to his version of events even when I knew they were wrong. But I simply nodded and changed the subject. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, wondering what version of me existed in the minds of our neighbors crafted by Thomas's careful social engineering. That evening, I studied Thomas as he helped Amanda with her homework. His patience with her contrasted sharply with the irritation he showed whenever I asked for help with anything. I watched how Amanda looked up at him with complete adoration, and for the first time I felt a stab of concern about the dynamic forming between them. Not jealousy as Thomas would later accuse, but a mother's instinct that something was fundamentally unbalanced. That night, as I prepared for bed, Thomas came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, nuzzling my neck in the way that once made my heart race. "You seemed distracted at dinner," he said. "Is something bothering you?" For a moment I considered telling him about Carol's visit, about my growing unease. Instead, I smiled at our reflection in the bathroom mirror and said everything was fine. Behind my smile, a small voice whispered that nothing was fine at all, but I was not ready to listen to it yet. As Amanda entered 4th grade, the cracks in our family foundation became impossible to ignore. Thomas's controlling behavior escalated from subtle manipulation to overt dominance. He installed a new phone system that recorded all calls. "For my convenience," he said. He began checking the odometer on my car each evening, questioning any mileage that did not align with my reported errands. My weekly allowance, as he called it, required receipts for every purchase. I still remember the dinner party that marked a turning point in how I viewed my marriage. We were hosting 2 couples from Thomas's firm and their wives. The conversation turned to a new museum exhibit I had read about. "We should all go," I suggested, animated for the first time that evening. I read that they have an interactive display about architectural influences throughout history. Thomas laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Elsa barely knows the difference between Gothic and Greek revival. She once called a Corinthian column the curly one." Everyone laughed, including me, because that's what was expected. But something inside me shriveled. It was not just the mockery, but the inaccuracy of it. I had never said such a thing. In fact, I had taken an art history course in college and had a better-than-average knowledge of architectural styles. But Thomas had created this narrative of me as charmingly ignorant, and over time I had begun to accept it. Amanda witnessed interactions like these regularly. At first, she would sometimes defend me. "Mom knows lots of things," she once said, after Thomas made a similar comment. But Thomas had ways of reshaping these moments, too. "Of course she does, sweetheart," he would reply with an indulgent smile. "Mom is wonderful at many things. I just like to tease her because she's such a good sport." Then later, privately to Amanda, "Sometimes Mom gets her feelings hurt too easily. We need to be careful with her, okay? She's more sensitive than you and me." Gradually, Amanda stopped defending me. Instead, she began to watch me with a mixture of concern and disappointment, already absorbing Thomas's perspective that there was something fragile and flawed about her mother. The financial secrets began in the summer of 1981. I had taken a part-time position teaching summer school, partly to supplement our income during a slow period in Thomas's business, but mostly to reclaim a piece of my identity. One afternoon, I answered a call from Thomas's bank regarding a transfer between accounts. Confused, I explained I only knew of our joint checking and savings accounts. "Mr. Lambert also has a personal account with us," the banker explained before realizing his mistake. "I apologize, I should have verified I was speaking with Mr. Lambert." That evening, I asked Thomas about the account. His reaction was immediate and frightening. His face flushed dark red, and he backed me against the kitchen counter looming over me. "You had no right to pry into my personal business," he hissed, keeping his voice low so Amanda would not hear from the living room. "I work for every penny in this family. If I choose to manage some money separately, that's my right." "I was not prying," I said, my voice trembling. "The bank called about a transfer. I was confused." "Always the victim, aren't you, Elsa?" His tone shifted to something worse than anger, a kind of contemptuous pity. "So easily confused, so helpless. What would you do without me to take care of everything?" Later, I discovered there were not just 1 but 3 separate accounts I had never known about. I found statements hidden in his home office during a rare afternoon when both Thomas and Amanda were out. There were large cash withdrawals with no listed purpose, regular transfers to someone named Lorelei Jensen, and statements from an investment account with a balance that made me dizzy. All while Thomas claimed we needed to budget carefully and limit expenses. When I tried to discuss these discoveries with Thomas, he twisted the conversation so thoroughly that I ended up apologizing for invading his privacy. Somehow, he converted my valid concerns into evidence of my paranoia and lack of trust. By the end of the conversation, I was in tears, begging his forgiveness for doubting him. Amanda witnessed the aftermath of this particular argument, walking into the kitchen to find me crying, and Thomas comforting me with a look of patient forbearance on his face. "Your mom is having a rough day," he told her. "Sometimes her emotions get the better of her judgment." The look Amanda gave me, a mixture of childish embarrassment and budding contempt, broke something inside me. My daughter was learning to see me through Thomas's carefully crafted lens. It was around this time that I found a women's support group that met at a community center downtown. I told Thomas it was a book club, and for 6 wonderful weeks I experienced the revelation of sharing my experiences with others who understood. Women who nodded in recognition when I described Thomas's behavior. Women who used terms like gaslighting and financial abuse that gave name to my experiences. Women who did not think I was crazy or oversensitive or imagining things. Then one Tuesday, I arrived at the community center to find Thomas waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with his arms folded. "Book club canceled today," he asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He had followed me. My safe space was compromised, and the message was clear: there would be no secrets from Thomas, no independent action he could not control. The stress began affecting my physical health. I developed migraine headaches, insomnia, and lost enough weight that my clothes hung loosely. Thomas suggested to friends that he was concerned about my mental health, laying groundwork I did not recognize at the time. When I saw our family physician, Thomas insisted on accompanying me, speaking to the doctor about his concerns before I could even describe my symptoms. I began keeping a secret journal documenting Thomas's behavior and my experiences. I hid it inside a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice on my bedside table, a book Thomas would never touch given his disdain for women's literature. The journal became my anchor to reality, a written record that contradicted the alternative narrative Thomas was creating, in which I was unstable, unreasonable, and increasingly unwell. The discovery of Thomas's affair came by accident. In early spring of 1982, I was dropping off blueprints he had forgotten at home. His secretary, Lorelei, a sleek blonde woman in her 20s, who always made me feel shabby and invisible, was out to lunch. Thomas was in a meeting, so I left the tube on his desk. As I turned to leave, I knocked over a stack of papers, and while gathering them up, a hotel receipt fluttered out. The receipt itself was innocent enough, a business trip to Seattle the previous month. But attached to it was a handwritten note in flowing feminine script. "Last weekend was amazing. Cannot wait for San Francisco. All my love, L." The L could only be Lorelei, the same Lorelei who appeared on those bank statements. San Francisco was where Thomas claimed to be going for a convention the following month. I confronted him that night after Amanda went to bed. I expected denial, perhaps, followed by a confession and apology. I did not expect the cold, calculated response I received. "Honestly, Elsa," he said with an exaggerated sigh, "this paranoia of yours is getting out of hand. Lorelei is my secretary. Of course she makes my travel arrangements and might leave notes about upcoming trips. The fact that you immediately jump to affair accusations shows how unbalanced you've become." I pulled out the hotel receipt with the note. "This is not about travel arrangements, Thomas. This is a love note." He glanced at it dismissively. "That's not even Lorelei's handwriting. And L could be anyone. Larry from accounting helped arrange that trip. This is exactly what I mean about your paranoia." I knew he was lying. I had seen Lorelei's handwriting on numerous office memos and birthday cards. But Thomas stuck to his denial with such conviction that for a moment I questioned my own certainty. "You need help, Elsa," he continued, his voice softening to the tone he used when particularly focused on manipulation. "I've been speaking with Dr. Mercer about your symptoms. The paranoia, the mood swings, the weight loss. He thinks you might be experiencing a nervous breakdown." Ice ran through my veins. Dr. Mercer was our family doctor, the one Thomas always accompanied me to see. "You've been discussing me with Dr. Mercer without my knowledge. As your husband, it's my responsibility to look after your health when you're not thinking clearly." He reached for my hand, which I pulled away. "I only want what's best for you." What happened next would change the course of our family forever. The next day, I overheard Thomas speaking to Amanda in her bedroom. I had returned early from grocery shopping and paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "Your mom is going through a difficult time," Thomas was saying in a gentle voice. "She's not well, sweetheart. She's having thoughts that aren't real and getting upset about things that aren't happening." "Is that why she was crying last night?" Amanda asked, her voice small and frightened. "Yes. She thinks I've done something wrong, but it's just in her mind. The doctor says sometimes this happens to people. Their brain starts telling them stories that aren't true." "Will she get better?" There was a pause, and I could imagine Thomas putting on his concerned expression, the one he practiced in the mirror when he thought I wasn't watching. I hope so, but we need to be patient with her. And if she says anything strange about me or about where I've been or what I've been doing, you come tell me right away, okay? So I can help her get the facts straight. Okay, Daddy. I stood frozen in the hallway, understanding with perfect clarity what was happening. Thomas was preparing our daughter to disbelieve anything I might tell her about his affair or his behavior. He was recruiting her as an ally against me, using my mental health as a weapon. The final confrontation came 3 nights later. I had spent the intervening time in a state of hypervigilance, researching psychiatric commitment laws at the public library, while Amanda was at school. What I discovered terrified me. As my husband Thomas could petition for an emergency psychiatric hold if he could convince a doctor I was a danger to myself or others. Given his careful groundwork with Dr. Mercer and others, I realized with horror how easy this would be for him to accomplish. That night, after Amanda was asleep, I confronted Thomas with what I had overheard him telling our daughter. "You're poisoning her against me," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, making her think I'm crazy so she won't believe me when I tell her about you and Lorelei. Thomas's facade of patience instantly vanished. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "And there is nothing to tell about me and Lorelei. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Elsa. These delusions are getting worse." "They're not delusions." "I saw the note, Thomas. I know about the separate accounts. I know you've been transferring money to her for months." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You've been spying on me. I've been uncovering the truth. There's a difference." He stepped closer, using his height to intimidate me, as he often did. "The truth is that you're unwell, and you're becoming a problem. I've tried to be patient to handle this privately, but you're leaving me no choice." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you continue with these accusations, if you try to poison Amanda against me with your delusions, I'll have no choice but to have you committed for evaluation. Dr. Mercer agrees you're showing signs of paranoid delusion, and he's prepared to sign the necessary papers." The blood drained from my face. "You wouldn't. For your own good, Elsa. And for Amanda's. She deserves a stable home." In that moment, looking into his cold eyes, I knew he was entirely capable of following through on his threat. I also knew that if he succeeded in having me committed even temporarily, I would lose everything, including any credibility with Amanda or the courts. That night after Thomas went to sleep, I called my sister Jean in Seattle from the kitchen phone, speaking in whispers. Jean and I had drifted apart over the years, another casualty of Thomas's isolation tactics, but she listened without interruption as I poured out the whole story. "You need to get out of there," she said when I finished. "Today, Elsa. Pack a bag and come to Seattle." "I can't leave Amanda," I protested. "Bring her with you. Thomas would call the police, claim I kidnapped her. Then we'll fight him legally, but you need to get safe first." The next morning I waited until Thomas left for work and Amanda for school. I packed a single suitcase with essentials, withdrew the maximum amount the bank would allow from our joint account, and left a note for Amanda explaining that I was going to stay with Aunt Jean for a while, and would call her that evening. I did not know then that Thomas would intercept that note, and that Amanda would never hear from me that night or for many nights afterward. Jean met me at the bus station in Seattle, her face tight with worry. That same evening, Thomas filed for emergency custody of Amanda, claiming I had abandoned the family and was mentally unstable. By the time I called our home in Portland, the phone had been disconnected. What followed was a legal nightmare I was completely unprepared for. Thomas had already consulted with the top 3 family law attorneys in Portland, creating a conflict of interest that prevented me from hiring them. The lawyer I could afford was fresh out of law school and overwhelmed by Thomas's legal team, and the medical documentation from Dr. Mercer, suggesting I suffered from paranoid delusions. The court appearance that decided custody remains the most devastating day of my life. Thomas appeared polished and concerned, expressing his deepest regrets that my condition had deteriorated to the point of abandoning our family. His attorney presented bank records showing my withdrawal, the testimony of Dr. Mercer about my paranoid accusations, and character witnesses from the community, testifying to Thomas's exemplary parenting and character. Most painful was Amanda's testimony, At 10 years old, she was deemed old enough to express her preference, and Thomas had spent the intervening weeks convincing her that I had abandoned her because of my illness. She left without saying goodbye, Amanda told the judge, tears streaming down her face. Dad says she's sick and needs help, but she won't get it. I want to stay with Dad where it's safe. Each word was a knife in my heart, but I recognized Thomas's phrasing, his careful coaching. When I tried to explain about the note I had left about Thomas's threats and manipulation, I saw in the judge's eyes that same look of pitying disbelief Thomas had cultivated in everyone around us. The court granted Thomas full custody with my visitation, limited to supervised visits twice a month. I was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment as a condition of even those limited visits. My life in Portland, my identity as Amanda's mother, my entire world as I had known it, collapsed in the space of a 2-hour hearing. I moved in with Jean in Seattle, forced to rebuild my life from scratch at 36 years old, branded as the unstable mother who abandoned her family, carrying the weight of my daughter's hatred and confusion. In a final twist of the knife, Thomas was granted permission to relocate with Amanda to the other side of Portland, making even my limited visitation logistically challenging for someone starting over with minimal resources. The 20 years that followed my forced departure from Portland were marked by painful milestones each, a fresh reminder of what Thomas had stolen from me. Amanda grew from a confused 10-year-old into a young woman who had fully absorbed her father's narrative about me. My twice-monthly supervised visits became exercises in hostility and rejection. At first, Amanda would barely speak to me, answering questions in monosyllables, while the court-appointed supervisor took notes. As she entered adolescence, she became more openly antagonistic. "Why do you even bother coming?" she asked me, during one particularly difficult visit when she was 14. "We both know you don't really want to be here." "I come because I love you," I told her, fighting back tears. "I have always loved you." She rolled her eyes with teenage disdain. "Dad says you only come because the court makes you to keep up appearances." Each visit I would bring small gifts, photos from my childhood, anything to try to maintain a connection. Most ended up in the trash before she left the visitation center. The supervisor, a kind woman named Ruth, who had been observing our interactions for years, once confided to me that she had never seen such a systematic campaign of parental alienation. But her observations carried no legal weight against Thomas's resources and influence. Amanda's high school graduation was a particular form of torture. Thomas had remarried by then to a woman named Brenda, who was only 12 years older than Amanda. They had a toddler, a half-brother Amanda adored. At the ceremony, I was not permitted to sit with the family, but was relegated to the general seating area. I watched from a distance, as Thomas, Brenda, and their inner circle celebrated my daughter's achievement, the proud father taking full credit for raising such an accomplished young woman alone. I stood in line afterward with other parents, waiting to congratulate the graduates. When I finally reached Amanda, her smile froze. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, holding out a small gift box containing a locket that had belonged to my grandmother. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks for coming," she replied stiffly, not taking the gift. Behind her, Thomas placed a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "Elsa," he acknowledged with a nod as though I were a distant acquaintance. "Nice of you to make it." I left the gift on a nearby table and walked away crying openly once I reached my rental car. Amanda's wedding at 22 followed the same pattern. I received a formal invitation but was seated in the last row, not acknowledged in the program and excluded from family photographs. The mother-daughter dance was performed by Amanda and Brenda, while I watched from my isolated table, invisible to the celebration around me. Through it all, Thomas continued to cultivate his image as the devoted single father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter after being abandoned by an unstable wife. His architectural firm had grown successful, and he had become something of a local business celebrity in Portland, his personal story of overcoming adversity part of his public persona. Each new profile piece or local award mentioned his triumph over personal tragedy when his wife left, the family language carefully crafted to paint him as the victim and hero. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life in Seattle brick by painful brick. Jean's support was unwavering, giving me a safe place to stay until I found employment teaching at an elementary school. Therapy became my lifeline, helping me understand the dynamics of emotional abuse and gaslighting I had experienced. I joined support groups for estranged parents, finding solace in the stories of others who had experienced similar pain and alienation. I wrote letters to Amanda that were returned unopened. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that received no acknowledgement. I called on holidays, often reaching only answering machines. Each attempt at connection was met with rejection or silence. When Amanda announced her pregnancy at 24, I reached out with genuine joy and excitement about becoming a grandmother. Her response was a formal letter obviously written at Thomas's direction, informing me that while I would be permitted to send gifts to my grandchild, I would not be welcome in their home and should not expect an invitation to any baby showers or celebrations. The letter concluded with a warning that any attempt to circumvent these boundaries would result in a complete severing of the limited contact we maintained. My grandchildren, a boy and later a girl, grew up learning that I was the bad grandmother who had abandoned their mother when she was little. On the rare occasions I was permitted to see them during my visits with Amanda, they regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and caution, clearly having absorbed the family narrative about my character and history. Despite the years of healing work I had done, the pain never fully subsided. I had recurring nightmares of trying to reach Amanda through a glass wall, seeing her in danger, but unable to help or even make her hear me. I would wake from these dreams with my pillow wet with tears, the weight of guilt and loss, as fresh as it had been in the courthouse 20 years earlier. When Thomas suffered a fatal heart attack 5 years ago, I felt a complex mix of emotions I still struggle to fully unpack. There was no satisfaction in his death, no sense of justice or closure. Instead, I felt a profound sadness for all that had been lost, all the years that could never be recovered. I attended the funeral standing at the back of a packed service where Thomas was eulogized as a pillar of the community, a devoted father, and a man of character. Afterward, Amanda approached me directly, for the first time in years, her face tight with grief and anger. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "He spent the last 20 years stressed and heartbroken because of what you did. You might as well have killed him yourself." I had no response that would penetrate the armor of her conviction. In her mind and in the minds of everyone there, I was, and would always be, the villain of the story. The unstable woman who had abandoned her family and forced Thomas to become both mother and father to their child. The truth I carried had no place in the narrative they had all accepted. I returned to Seattle, believing that Thomas's death had only cemented the wall between Amanda and me, that the truth would die with him, and I would never be able to reclaim my place in my daughter's life or heart. I was 62 years old, and I had come to accept that some wounds never heal, some losses can never be restored. I could not have imagined that fate had one more twist in store, that the truth Thomas had so carefully buried would find its way to the surface in a way neither he nor I could have predicted. Thomas's death created financial complications for Amanda that neither of us anticipated. Despite his successful career and public image of prosperity, he had accumulated significant debt in his later years. The economic downturn had hit his architectural firm hard, and a series of speculative real estate investments had gone badly. The grand family home that had once been the showcase of his success was now underwater on its mortgage. Amanda inherited the house, but not the means to maintain it. After struggling for several years to keep up with payments while raising her own family, she finally decided to sell. But the housing market had changed, and the once prestigious property needed significant updates to attract buyers in its price range. It was in this context that I received an unexpected call from Amanda last spring. Her voice was stiff with reluctance as she explained the situation. "The realtor says the house needs work before we can list it at the price we need," she said without preamble. "I know you still have a few things stored in the attic, and I thought you might want to come get them before we start renovations." It was the thinnest of pretexts. Any items of mine that had remained in that house could have been boxed up and shipped or simply discarded after 25 years. But I recognized it for what it was: the closest thing to an olive branch Amanda could extend without compromising the narrative she had lived with for decades. I could help with the cleaning and sorting, I offered carefully. "I have some experience with home staging from a friend's real estate business." A long pause. "That would be helpful," she finally said in a tone that suggested she was accepting a burden rather than assistance. "I can only take a week off work for this. The contractor starts the following Monday." And so I found myself returning to the house I had fled in fear a quarter century earlier now, a 67-year-old woman facing the ghost of my former life. Amanda, now 35, greeted me at the door, with a formal handshake rather than an embrace. She had Thomas's height and commanding presence, but my auburn hair and features. Looking at her was like seeing an alternate version of myself, one who had grown up with Thomas's values and perspective unchallenged. The first days were achingly awkward. We worked in different rooms, communicating only when necessary about which items to keep, donate, or discard. Amanda maintained a rigid boundary, refusing to engage in any conversation that veered toward the personal. When we broke for meals, she would make businesslike arrangements about takeout orders or sandwiches, then retreat to eat separately while checking emails or making calls. I focused on being useful, rather than pushing for connection, tackling the most unpleasant cleaning tasks, without complaint, organizing decades of accumulated belongings, efficiently offering advice on repairs and updates only when asked, directly. Each night I returned to my hotel room, physically exhausted but emotionally wired, calling Jean to decompress from the strain of existing in a space so charged with painful history. On the fourth day, Amanda assigned me to the master bathroom, a dated space with 1980s fixtures that needed complete renovation. My task was to remove the large vanity mirror to prepare for the contractor. "Be careful with it," Amanda instructed. "It's apparently a single piece of beveled glass that would be expensive to replace if the new owners want to keep it." I worked slowly, methodically loosening the mounting brackets that held the heavy mirror to the wall. As I carefully pulled it away from the wall, I noticed something taped to the back of it. A yellowed envelope that had been hidden between the mirror and the wall, invisible, unless the mirror was removed. My hands trembled as I detached the envelope. It was addressed to someone named Robert Lambert Thomas's brother, who had died before I met him. The postmark was from 1982, just months after I had left. The return address was Thomas's office. I knew I should call Amanda, immediately show her the envelope without opening it, but something told me this might be important, might contain information I had sought for decades. With shaking fingers, I carefully opened the sealed envelope and removed several pages of Thomas's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Rob," the letter began, "I'm writing to update you on the situation with Elsa. Everything has worked out exactly as planned. The judge granted me full custody of Amanda with Elsa, limited to supervised visitation twice a month. Even better, I've been approved to relocate to the west side of the city, making it nearly impossible for her to maintain even those limited visits given her financial situation." My heart pounded as I continued reading. Thomas described in meticulous detail how he had manipulated the custody case, working with Dr. Mercer to establish a paper trail of mental health concerns, carefully coaching Amanda on what to say to the judge, even paying a former colleague of mine to testify that I had shown erratic behavior at work. "The beauty of it," he wrote, "is that the more Elsa tried to expose my relationship with Lorelei or the financial irregularities she discovered, the more unstable she appeared. By the time we got to court, everyone was predisposed to see her as paranoid and delusional. No one believed her allegations about the affair or the money, exactly as I knew would happen." Tears blurred my vision as I read Thomas's cold assessment of his strategic victory, his pride in having destroyed my credibility and relationship with our daughter. He boasted about how easy it had been to turn Amanda against me, how completely she had accepted his version of events. She now believes her mother abandoned her without even saying goodbye. I intercepted the note Elsa left for her, of course. "Within a year, I predict Amanda will actively resent any attempt Elsa makes to maintain contact. Mission accomplished, brother." The final paragraphs revealed what had prompted Thomas's campaign to discredit me. I had gotten too close to discovering financial fraud he had been committing through his firm, using client funds for personal investments. His relationship with Lorelei was real, but secondary to his fear that I would expose his illegal activities. Once I realized how much Elsa had pieced together, I had no choice but to discredit her completely. Better she be seen as an unstable woman who abandoned her family than someone whose accusations might trigger an audit or investigation. Lorelei has been well compensated for her role in all this, though I'm already growing tired of her. The new secretary, Brenda, shows more promise anyway. I sat on the bathroom floor, the letter clutched in my hands, experiencing a dizzying mixture of vindication and renewed grief. After all these years, here was proof of what I had always known but could never prove. Thomas had systematically destroyed my life, my relationship with my daughter, my reputation and identity, all to protect himself from the consequences of his own actions. I was so absorbed in the letter that I didn't hear Amanda's approach. Her voice from the doorway startled me. "What's that?" I looked up to see her watching me with suspicion, eyes narrowed at the papers in my hand. For a moment I considered hiding the letter, afraid of her reaction, afraid of not being believed yet again. But 25 years of carrying an unheard truth gave me courage. I found it taped behind the mirror. I said, my voice steady, despite my internal turmoil. "It's a letter from your father to his brother, written right after the custody hearing." Amanda's expression hardened. "And you opened it. It wasn't addressed to you." I met her gaze directly. "No, it wasn't. But I think you need to read it." Her hand extended automatically when I held the letter out, though her face showed reluctance. "What is it about?" "It's about me," I said simply, "about what really happened." Amanda took the letter from my outstretched hand, her expression guarded and skeptical. I remained seated on the bathroom floor, afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile moment with any word or gesture that might cause her to discard the letter unread. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it in the tiled bathroom's acoustics. She began reading, her posture rigid with suspicion. Within seconds, her expression shifted from skepticism to confusion. By the second page, her face had drained of color, and she sank down to sit on the edge of the bathtub, her legs seemingly unable to support her. I watched emotions chase across her face: disbelief, anger, denial, shock. She shook her head several times, looked up at me accusingly, then returned to the pages with increasing agitation. When she reached the final page, she turned back to the beginning and read it again, as though hoping the words would rearrange themselves into a different truth. "This is fake," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You could have written this yourself." "It's your father's handwriting," I said gently. "You know it as well as I do. You could have copied it, practiced it." "For what purpose, Amanda? To plant behind a mirror that hasn't been moved in decades on the off chance you'd ask me to help clean the house after your father died." She flinched at the logic, but rallied. "This can't be true. Dad would never do these things. The doctor confirmed you were having delusions." "Dr. Mercer was your father's golf partner," I said, the pieces falling into place as I spoke. "Did you know that? They'd been friends since college. He was never my doctor by choice." Amanda stood abruptly, still clutching the letter. "I need to confirm this is Dad's handwriting, and even if it is, he probably wrote it as some kind of creative writing exercise. Or maybe he was angry and venting. It doesn't mean everything in here actually happened." I nodded, understanding her desperate need to preserve the foundation of her reality. "That's fair. You should verify everything." A thought occurred to me. "Amanda, I kept a journal during that time. I hid it in a hollowed-out book of Pride and Prejudice. Is it still in the house?" Her eyes widened slightly. "In the guest room bookshelf. Dad never moved your books." We walked in tense silence to the guest room, which had once been my reading sanctuary. The bookshelf still held my collection, dusty but intact. The copy of Pride and Prejudice was exactly where I had left it a quarter-century ago. With trembling hands, I opened it to reveal the hollowed center where my small leather journal remained hidden. I handed it to Amanda without opening it. "Read it," I said. "It documents everything as it was happening before I left." Amanda took the journal with visible reluctance, as though it might burn her fingers. She retreated to the window seat, putting physical distance between us, and began to read. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, giving her space and time to absorb the painful truths contained in those pages. The journal chronicled my growing awareness of Thomas's manipulation and control, my discovery of his affair with Lorelei, the financial irregularities, his threats to have me committed. It detailed specific conversations, dates, incidents that aligned perfectly with the casual admissions in Thomas's letter to his brother. As Amanda read, silent tears began streaming down her face. She made no move to wipe them away, totally absorbed in reconciling these revelations with the narrative that had shaped her entire life. "There's more," she said, finally, her voice hollow. "In Dad's study, after he died, I boxed up his papers but couldn't bring myself to go through them yet. We moved to Thomas's home office, a room I had never been permitted to enter freely during my marriage." Amanda pulled out several cardboard file boxes, and began methodically searching through them. In the third box, she found a folder labeled Elsa Custody, containing court documents, correspondence with lawyers, and notes in Thomas's handwriting detailing his strategy. Most damning was a draft affidavit from Dr. Mercer, with Thomas's annotations in the margins suggesting specific language about my paranoid tendencies and delusional jealousy. A sticky note attached read, "Needs to be stronger re-abandonment. Emphasize flight risk. We'll discuss payment arrangements separately. TMD." Amanda sat on the floor, surrounded by the physical evidence of her father's systematic destruction of my life and character. The careful scaffolding of lies that had structured her understanding of her childhood, her mother and her father, was collapsing around her. "He lied." She whispered more to herself than to me. "He lied about everything." "Yes," I said simply. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears and confusion. "But why? Why would he do this?" I pointed to the relevant section in Thomas's letter. He was committing fraud through his business. I had discovered evidence of it along with his affair. He needed to discredit me completely before I could expose him. And Brenda, his second wife. According to the letter, she was his secretary before they married. He was already interested in her while still involved with Lorelei. Amanda's face crumpled as another realization hit her. I was part of it. I helped him. I testified against you. I told the judge I wanted to stay with Dad. "You were 10 years old," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You believed what your father told you. What choice did you have? But later, when I was older, I was so awful to you. The things I said during those visitations, the way I treated you at my graduation, my wedding." Her voice broke. "He didn't even let you hold your grandchildren." The dam inside me broke, and tears I had held back for Amanda's sake finally flowed freely. "You believed what you were raised to believe. The person who should have protected you from this pain was your father, not you." Amanda doubled over as though in physical pain, sobbing with the force of 25 years of misplaced anger and new grief. I moved cautiously to the floor beside her, uncertain if my comfort would be welcome. When I gently touched her shoulder, she turned and fell against me, clutching me, with the desperate strength of the child she had been when I was taken from her. We sat there among the scattered evidence of Thomas's betrayal, mother and daughter, reunited by the very truth that had separated us, both grieving for what had been stolen from us and facing the daunting task of rebuilding a relationship from the ashes of deliberate destruction. "What happens now?" Amanda asked when she could finally speak again, her voice ragged from crying. "That's up to you," I told her. "I've never stopped loving you, never stopped wanting to be your mother, but I understand this is a lot to process." She looked around at the papers scattered on the floor, the physical proof of a lifelong deception. "I need time to think about all of this, to figure out who I am if everything I believed was wrong." "I understand," I said, though. The prospect of another separation, even temporary, felt like a physical blow. "Take whatever time you need." Amanda shook her head, reaching for my hand. "No, that's not what I mean. I need time, but I don't want you to go away again. I've lost 25 years with my mother because of lies. I don't want to lose any more time." Those words, so long hoped for, but never expected, were the beginning of our journey back to each other. A journey neither easy nor straightforward, but founded at last on truth rather than deception. 6 months after discovering the letter behind the mirror, Amanda and I sit together in the office of Dr. Eleanor Wilson, the therapist who has been guiding our reconciliation process. The journey has not been easy for either of us, but we are committed to rebuilding what Thomas systematically destroyed. "I had this image of my father as this heroic single dad who sacrificed everything for me," Amanda explains during one session. "Finding out that he deliberately destroyed my mother's life and relationship with me for his own protection. It's like grieving a person who never actually existed." Dr. Wilson nods. "You're grieving the father you thought you had while processing anger toward the father he actually was. That's incredibly complex emotional terrain. For my part, the healing process involves navigating my own complicated feelings, the vindication of finally having the truth acknowledged, battles with the grief of lost decades. Every milestone I missed in Amanda's life, every relationship event with my grandchildren that can never be recaptured, creates fresh waves of mourning. Some days I'm overwhelmed by anger, I admit during a private session. Not just at Thomas, but at a system that made it so easy for him to weaponize mental health accusations against me. At friends and family who never questioned his narrative. Dr. Wilson helps me channel these feelings productively, to acknowledge them without allowing bitterness to poison the new relationship forming with Amanda. The first time I properly meet my grandchildren, Joshua 11 and Emma 8, is an emotional watershed. Amanda has prepared them with an age-appropriate explanation that Grandpa told some untrue stories about Grandma Elsa that kept her away, but now we know the truth. They are cautiously curious, studying me with the unfiltered intensity of children. Emma breaks the ice by announcing, "You have the same color hair as Mom and me. Dad says it's a special gene." "That's right," I tell her, fighting back tears at this small connection, this thread of continuity that Thomas could not sever. It's called the MC1R gene. My mother had this color too, and her mother before her. "So it's like a special code that connects us?" she asks. Exactly like that. The first Thanksgiving after our reconciliation marks a turning point. Amanda hosts at her new home, a modest house she purchased after selling the family property that held so many painful memories. Her husband Michael, initially skeptical of my sudden reappearance in their lives, has come to understand the magnitude of the deception perpetrated by his father-in-law and supports Amanda's healing journey. Most meaningful is Amanda's effort to correct the false narrative with extended family and friends. She invites my sister Jean, who has supported me through decades of pain. She reaches out to cousins and old family friends who had been told I abandoned the family, explaining the truth with courage and humility. "I need to apologize," she tells my cousin Kate, who had been close to me before Thomas isolated me. "I spent years reinforcing Dad's lies about Mom. I need to set the record straight." This public acknowledgement of the truth heals wounds I had thought would remain open forever. Watching Amanda reclaim her own integrity by correcting the false narrative gives me a profound sense of pride in the woman she has become, despite not because of her father's influence. As we continue sorting through Thomas's affairs, Amanda discovers more evidence of his deception, including tax documents, suggesting the financial fraud I had suspected was even more extensive than we knew. She struggles with whether to report these findings to authorities, weighing the potential legal and reputational consequences against the principle of truth. Part of me wants to protect his memory, even now, she confesses. Not for his sake, but because his disgrace would affect me, my children, everyone who bears his name. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," I tell her. The truth has already served its most important purpose in reuniting us. In a decision that reflects her own moral compass rather than her father's example, Amanda ultimately consults a lawyer and discreetly ensures restitution is made to affected parties without public exposure. "I'm choosing to break the cycle," she explains. "Dad built his life on secrets and lies. I'm choosing transparency and repair." My own journey toward forgiveness is neither linear nor complete. I do not forgive Thomas for Amanda's sake, or to conform to social expectations about healing. I work toward releasing the anger and bitterness, because carrying it damages my present happiness and future possibilities. This is forgiveness as self-care, rather than absolution for the perpetrator. 3 months after discovering the letter, I make a decision that surprises even me. I sell my condo in Seattle and purchase a small house 10 minutes from Amanda's family. Jean helps me move, supportive as always, but warning me to proceed with caution. "Are you sure about this, Elsa?" she asks as we unpack boxes in my new kitchen. "You've built a life in Seattle. What if things with Amanda don't work out the way you hope?" "Then I'll have tried," I answer. I spent 25 years keeping a safe distance because the pain of rejection was too great. I don't want safety anymore. I want my daughter and grandchildren, whatever the risk. Our first Christmas together is imperfect, but precious. Old habits of distrust and caution surface occasionally. Amanda sometimes withdraws into silence when memories become too painful. I sometimes hesitate to express opinions about the children, afraid of overstepping boundaries, but we are learning a new language of family together, creating traditions unburdened by Thomas's manipulations. As I help Emma hang ornaments on the Christmas tree, she asks innocently, "Were you sad when you couldn't see Mom for all those years?" Amanda tenses across the room, but I meet her gaze steadily before turning to my granddaughter. "Very sad," I answer honestly, but I never stopped loving your mom, not for a single day. And now I get to love you and your brother too, which makes me very happy." Emma nods, absorbing this information with a child's acceptance. "That's good. Mom says families should always have second chances." The wisdom from the mouth of a child brings tears to both Amanda's eyes and mine, a moment of connection across the generations that Thomas tried so hard to keep separate. As this year draws to a close, I reflect on the strange and winding path that led to this reclaimed family. The truth that was buried behind a mirror for 25 years changed everything when it finally emerged. The letter that Thomas wrote in triumph became the instrument of his ultimate defeat, restoring what he had worked so hard to destroy. The most profound lesson I've learned is that judgments made on partial information can cause irreparable harm. So many people in our lives, from judges to doctors to friends and family, accepted one version of events without question, allowing a master manipulator to weaponize their trust. We all think we can recognize truth from falsehood, but skilled liars count on that confidence. If there's anything I hope you'll take from my story, it's to question narratives that demonize the absent, to look deeper when someone is stripped of their voice and credibility. The person labeled unstable or dangerous may simply be the one with the least power to control the story. Karma does indeed have a memory. Buried secrets find their way to the surface, often in ways we never anticipate. For Thomas, it was a forgotten letter taped behind a mirror he never expected would be removed. For each of us, our actions create ripples that eventually return to us, sometimes decades later. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew? Have you experienced the painful process of rebuilding trust after deception? Please share your stories in the comments below. And if my journey through decades of pain to eventual vindication has touched you in any way, please subscribe to hear more stories of healing and redemption. Like and share with someone who might need to be reminded that buried truths eventually rise and that it's never too late for healing to begin. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that even the deepest wounds can become the foundation for new beginnings.